Okay, so who do we have here? I'm unmuting everyone for the start, just to sort of, give a polite hello, see who's here.
Hi, my name is May.
One moment, May. Hold your horses, just one moment. One moment. But forgive my Aussie manners. I'm very sorry. I'm an Aussie who's been in Israel for too bloody long. Who else do we have here? Okay, so let's see everyone. One moment. One moment. Yeah, I'm just asking some of you to start video so we can see your faces, and we are going to begin. Okay. Okay, so who do we have here?
You have Alex in Jerusalem, current Masa participant. Hi.
Okay, Alex in Jerusalem. Who else do we have here?
It's May from Haifa.
May from Haifa. Thank you very much. Nice to be with you. Who else do we have?
Ruth from London.
Ruth from London. Very nice. Who else?
Bella also from London.
Who else is from London?
Me, Bella.
May Bella. Excellent. Who else do we have?
Nicole from London.
Okay.
Wow.
What are Londoners?
No,
Listen from Seattle.
Okay. Who else do we have?
Shalom, my name is Nissim. I'm from Mumbai, India.
Hi, Nissim. How's it going?
Very well. Thank you.
Who else do we have?
I'm Jeremy from New York, but I'm a colleague of Nissim's from Mumbai.
Excellent. Excellent. Who else do we have online?
No, I'm from London.
What's your name again? The last Londoner?
Noam.
Noam. Lovely to meet you.
Annie.
Who else do we have? Anyone else online?
Hi, my name is Anastasia. I'm from Ukraine.
Hi, Anastasia. Hi. How's it going?
Fine, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So what we're going to do is anyone else, has there been anyone else that's joined on that hasn't introduced themselves yet? No. Okay. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and be a little bit un-Israeli about this, and I'm going to try and keep the mute buttons off, meaning I'm assuming everyone here, we can all try as much as we can to be in a classroom to have a discussion together, because this is by no means a lecture, but rather we're all together going to go through something really cool, hopefully. And so we're going to keep the mute buttons off, see how that goes, and I'm going to kind of start, and then we're going to sort of all have a cool discussion about our lecture. Does that make perfect sense? Some sense?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so just a little word about myself. I'm far less interesting than this talk. My name is Johnny Schnitzer. As you can perhaps hear from my accent, I'm an Australian who's been living in Israel for too bloody long. I have a gorgeous wife who's also Australian, and we have 3 little rat bags living in Ra'anana. Anyone who doesn't know what a rat bag is, that's a term for, term of endearment for little children. I'm a PhD candidate in Jewish philosophy, which means that we're not going to get any answers today, but only hopefully ask more questions. Other than that, I lecture in Israel and abroad on a wide variety of ideas regarding Israel and Judaism. In the past, I've been advisor to the CEO of Birthright. I've led worldwide group operations. I've led official and unofficial delegations for the state of Israel, anywhere from -30 degrees in Harbin, China, to God knows where, and so on and so forth. Like I said, I'm not the point here. what we're going to try and do in the time we have, I'm just going to stress this is the first lecture, first session of a 4-series session. So if we want to get the maximum out of this, I assume Masa put this on. This is the first of 4 lectures, which are discussing the 4 books that changed Jewish history. And when I say the 4 books that changed Jewish history, the question that is going to be in the back of our minds, what I want us all to be thinking about, sort of hovering somewhere over here, is what does it mean to be Jewish? Right? What are we meant to do? And to do this, we're going to focus each lesson on 4 different books. So today we're discussing the Bible, right? Humanity's game changer, the first book that created a Jewish people. It's actually not precise to say it created a Jewish people because there was a Jewish people before the Bible was written, but that first book revolutionized what it meant to be Jewish. The second, and we're going to stress today on, what is the idea according to the actual text and discuss this. The second lecture is going to focus on the Talmud, the second book, which created a revolution in Judaism, and it basically killed the prophets. And it replaced them with something else, a wild book that completely changed what it means to be Jewish. And it introduced, perhaps for the first time, the question of how. How do you go about being Jewish? The Bible doesn't focus on this too much. It kind of says what you need to do. The Talmud is obsessed. The Gemara of 2,000 years ago is obsessed with how, and the sort of question-asking Jew. Then later on, we have the guide for the perplexed, when philosophy enters into Judaism, and in a very Simon Sinek kind of way, we start asking why. Why be Jewish? And we need to understand in the context of our talk that Jews asking why be Jewish simply was not asked until the medieval era. It's simply in text that we have, it had not occurred to Jews to ask or put ink on paper, daring to ask why be Jewish and what this means. And our final revolution is the rise of Kabbalah, where we're going to focus on the Zohar. The Zohar not being the only Kabbalistic text, but perhaps the sort of most prominent, paramount text that completely changes the last 3 revolutions and takes us on a mystical journey, and that'll be our last lecture. All clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay. Before we begin, just a tiny little, if you like, a sort of intro. How do I put myself? Okay. You see this page here. Here's the problem. What we have here is a text. Let's pretend it's the Bible. It's not really the Bible. It's a different text. But here's my point, and here's our problem at hand. There comes a point in each one of our lives where we realize, hopefully, perhaps not, if not, then maybe today, that we've always been told by others what it means to be Jewish. Now, here's the problem. When the Bible was first written, the first book that creates a Jewish people and what it means to be Jewish, you had the book, black ink or brown ink on paper or parchment. And it was very clear. It was like reading the New York Times, reading the news item. You got the news item for what it is. However, throughout Jewish history, that is not the way we've been learning the text. We've been learning the text like this. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. This is how Jews have been learning the text for thousands of years, or at least for 2,000 years. What does that mean? If you see here this line, that's sort of in bold, the big line, it says, in the beginning, God created. All of a sudden, the text, the news item, becomes the smallest part of the information given to the individual, and what we're actually reading is op-eds. Our notion of what it means to be Jewish, what a Jew is, what the Bible wants of us, what God wants of us, and this is kind of the goal of what we're going to try and do here throughout history has been through op-eds, through what others have to tell us. By the way, very important, any commentator we take, regardless of anyone in this lesson, regardless of what we know of previous commentators, every commentator has something very important to say about the Bible, but that doesn't change the fact that every commentator we see on this page, from the top left to the 2 bottom, by the way, I cut this page. There are actually 5 other op-eds lower down. I, left us to get the gist of it. the news item becomes the smallest bit, and the op-ed's the most important part. And so what we're going to try and do today is focus on what the Bible has to say about what it means to be Jewish. True, I've done some editing, and I challenge you to challenge my editing, but I've done editing in a way that we're going to look at certain texts that stress what it means to be Jewish without commentators. It's going to be all about our discussion relating to what the Bible, a book written thousands of years ago, has to say without any op-eds. Up until here, capiche?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all of you, or some of you, or whoever would like to share, what does it mean to you to be Jewish? Now here I know it's going to be a little bit difficult because we're off the mic, so let's try and do it in an easy manner so I don't have to deal with turning on and off mics. Forgive me for my laziness. Who would like to start? Very briefly, what does it mean to you to be Jewish?
To be part of a family, to be part of a nation, and to uphold a responsibility. And lastly, to strive to do better each and every day.
Okay, Alex, remind me where you're from?
Originally from Los Angeles, but currently living in Jerusalem.
Okay, brilliant. So you're stressing the importance of family, of part of something greater. And what was your final note? To sort of to be better.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, brilliant. Who else would like to give a go?
Hi, for me, to be Jewish means to be a part of the unique history and culture.
Okay, so to be part of a story that's been told for generations. Excellent.
Yes, with the emphasis that it's very, very unique.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so it's part of a unique story. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Who else would like to have a go? Anyone?
Okay, yeah, it's me, Shamir.
Yeah.
So I'm from India. For me, being a Jewish is basically what our parents have told us. Like, being Jewish is like you was in slavery in Egypt, and there's like from the stories that I have heard, the culture I was born into, the people with the same thought and same cultural thing, like that's where I can come from, like being a Jewish.
Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Who else? We'll have one other go or two other goes.
I think being Jewish for me is like being part of a people that strives for like to be like act in an ethical way, and like strive to make the world a better place, and then like help others to do that.
Okay. Okay. Brilliant. Who else is online? Who else would like to have a go? We should, in fact, let's have a round with everyone. We have time. It's okay. Who's next? Anyone else?
People who have a shared history, who share these common texts, have the same Torah. You can be anywhere in the whole world, but you have the same Torah to follow.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So, anyone else want to have a go before we move on?
I would say,
Yes.
I would say, not necessarily for me personally, but I think that a common narrative and maybe like amongst the more religious is that your mother has to be Jewish or you have to convert through a very like intense process.
Okay. So Rose, remind me where you're from?
I am in LA right now.
In LA right now. Very interesting. So you're focusing, Rose, then on the kind of the idea of the more legalistic aspect of what it means to be Jewish.
But I don't agree with that. But I just think it's important to like throw that perspective in here.
Thank you very much. So do you want to then add on to that, because that was a very important point, what it means for you to be Jewish?
For me, being Jewish means to keep the traditions and the cultures and the culture that's been passed down from generation to generation.
Okay. So if I summarize so far, before we keep on, if anyone else has, if I summarize so far, what we have is a kind of echoing of this idea of, firstly, like the marathon runners that passed on the metal, the sort of, running in chain. It's about being part of a continuum, being part of a continuum of a tradition, of a history, of a unique story. that ultimately its goal is to make us and the world a better place. Yeah?
I think it's also about questioning everything. Because I think my idea of being Jewish could be different to all of you. And there's very, very many different types and varieties in being Jewish. And it comes with a lot of learning and challenging your own perceptions and others' perceptions.
Fascinating, fascinating. So Nicole has added something completely different, and the idea, so you'd say for you, Nicole, it's a kind of a central element to being Jewish?
Yeah.
Interesting, fascinating. I saw Ruth wanted to say something?
Oh, I didn't have anything extra
Oh.
to say. I guess for me, it's just like community and a set of morals and ethics, but it's kind of already been said.
Okay, okay. Anyone else before we continue? Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so what we have now, remember our first question was, what does it mean to be Jewish? The next question I want us all to keep in the back of our minds as we go along with, remember, looking at the actual news item without the op-eds, what was actually written back then, to try throughout our discussion to wonder if our notion of what it means to be Jewish, where it meets the kind of the beginning thousands of years ago, and where we feel we've sort of joined onto the bandwagon and moved forward. So without further ado, let's begin. Like I said, this class, this lecture, and hopefully we're all going to be together for the 4 of them, because trust me, if we stay together for the 4 series lecture, we really are going to be able to get a comprehensive view of how fluid the concept of what it means to be Jewish is through texts that became best-selling texts in the sense that up until then, the world was something, or the Jewish world was something. The text of the book came along, nothing was the same ever again, and then until another book came and toppled it on its head. So let's start. So this time we're going to focus on, like I said, the Bible. Before we get into the text that, in my opinion, and hopefully this will create, a great discussion between us of what it means to be Jewish in the Bible, I want to start with, when we go into Barnes and Nobles, or, we're surfing on Amazon to choose a new book, what we'll sometimes do, right, is open the first page, have a look and see what it says. So I'd like us to start. I've brought the first passage of the Bible, right, the first few sentences. I'd like us to have a look, and based on these first, just, have a little tiny discussion of what we think the book is about based on these passages. Do we have anyone who wants to read them out aloud? Anyone?
I
Okay.
can do that.
Sure.
Yes. So who volunteered?
Me,
Yes,
Samir.
Sam. Go for it.
In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Genesis 1:1, 2, 3.
Right. So this is the beginning of the book, right? We go into Barnes and Nobles, we go into, any bookshop, we open it up. What is going on here? Like, what would you assume this book is about if you just look at the first few sentences?
About the
Maybe it's trying to say that before, like after Earth is created, it was really empty, so it created the God started creating something out of nothing. Maybe that's what it trying to say.
Okay.
would-
Yes, Allison?
I would say from this one, some sort of transition from here's where we were to here's where we are, and also kind of this just dichotomy, just trying to draw lines between things,
Okay.
which is kind of Jewish.
Very interesting. But by the way, just note, Allison and Sam, Sam, you mentioned from nothing to something, and Allison, you're
Yes.
talking about dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
These are
I think
both
so.
These are both Greek philosophical concepts which creep into discussion way later on. Let's try to go back to getting out of, and I know it's very hard to do, but again, let's try and get into the mindset of when this was first written. You walked into the bookshop thousands of years ago. We don't yet know about Aristotle and Plato. They don't exist. we don't know about something to nothing, right? It's hard to detach ourselves from everything that we've learned to approach the text. It's almost impossible to look at a news item without the op-eds, right?
Like perhaps when you first read the text, like either you think, okay, it's going to be about like creation, the existence of the world, and like what's within it, and that's it, or it's like the beginning of something that's completely unclear what it's going to be, and it could be pretty much anything.
Interesting. Fascinating point, Noam. Yeah, it's you know, if I again touch upon the Bible for a brief moment as distinct from the three other books, right? The Talmud. If we look at as we'll see in the next class, if we look at the beginning of the Talmud, the beginning of the Guide for the Perplexed, the beginning of the Zohar, what you see is what you get. All you need is the first paragraph of each of those books, and you know what you're jumping into. With the Bible, right, it's full of, and here we're going to move on, it's full of, there are sections that are very architectural and technical and how to build this and that, and there are sections that are legalistic, and there's myth, right? This is perhaps the beginning of the mythological section of, you know, God creating, but it really is a sort of ambiguous, and I like what you said, Noam, it's this kind of, on the one hand, starting to tell us about creation, but on the other hand, you know, we don't even know what we're going to enter into, this sort of this mystery. Anyone else like to shed light on the passage or thoughts?
I would like to very quickly add.
Yes.
Can I?
Yeah, sure, Nisim, go for it.
To me, the very first line also looks like a very interesting science fiction. It says, in the beginning, it's talking about time. And then it's also talking in that very same line, creating heaven and earth. I mean, it's combining time and space in that one line. So I would look forward to read such a book.
Fascinating point. Wow. So you're saying even if we were to, you're saying even pre-time of philosophy, right? Someone who knows that there's a lunar calendar, and we're going to sort of plow the fields and do what we have to do, and we have a concept of time, all of a sudden you're reading a book that gives you sort of a concept of time and then something that's completely different. Fascinating point. Very interesting. Anyone else?
I think what's quite interesting is that already you're introduced to this character who speaks, and what they speak happens. And it's a really interesting premise because you wouldn't, in real life, you wouldn't have come across anything like that.
Great point, Guy. This is, okay, so Guy is already pointing to perhaps we are meeting here the narrator, one of the, if not the lead character in the Bible, God. And what's going on here, right? Sort of, we have this kind of, it starts with talking about God and sort of the third, you know, kind of like God was doing this, and then he actually speaks. Very interesting. Anyone else? Okay, so having taken a look at the first few lines, I think it's safe to agree that when we might not be sure if we open the first few pages what the book is about. I'm now going to put that aside, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to challenge you, because I'm assuming everyone in this discussion has a bit of a sense of what the Bible is about. I challenge you to summarize the plot of the Bible in one sentence. Who's up for the challenge?
What I think Bible is basically, I could say is like a storybook from the past that's been told us, maybe.
Okay, so let me, Sam, I'll be a bit clearer. Let's pretend I'm Random House. I'm a publisher.
Okay.
You come to me with the Bible. I want you to sell me the Bible, the plot of the Bible, the Hollywood story in one line. What is it about?
History of past.
Okay, very interesting.
I would say a book of fables that to guide your life.
Okay, very interesting. So you're taking it, Alex, then, so both of you, right, Nisim and Alex, are taking it more in you're less looking at the story, you're more looking at, this is, I think, the market audience. This is sort of what it's about, right? Less about the actual story.
Yeah, that's right. I disagree with Nissim. It's not a book of history. That you can believe in it, but at its core, at its essence, Torah is a guidebook. And the closer one follows it, but if you look into it, if you pick up a Chumash, it's nothing but stories that you actually have to go out and translate. You know, the English itself won't deliver the words to you. You have to decipher it for yourself. So, yeah.
Okay, fascinating. Who else? Who else would like to have a go?
The creation of a people.
Sorry, Guy, you got cut off. The creation of?
The creation of a people or nation.
Fascinating. Okay, okay, I like that. The creation of a people. So Guy is already getting warmer to what I'm looking at, what I'm looking for, and that is, I want the story. I want someone to tell me in a silly sentence what it's about, and Guy is super close. He's saying it's about the birth of a nation, right? Anyone else want to have a go?
I'd say the Jews traveling from Exodus to Egypt to the Promised Land and becoming a nation along the way.
Fascinating. Okay. Okay. Very interesting. Okay, so you're adding now, you know, sort of certain, you know, turning points, or the kind of the journey that the sort of the hero, one of the heroes, are taking. Would someone else like to have a go?
I might say the misadventures of a people trying to find themselves.
Wow, I like that a lot. The misadventures. That is good. That is very good.
If you're trying to pitch it for Hollywood.
So I want you, Alison. I want you to remember the misadventures. We're gonna get to a text that we'll get back to the misadventures element of this people. But what then? So you've already added kind of like a characteristic of the person, right? Usually when we try and sell a plot, sell a book, the director or the producer wants to know what's unique about this character. So you're already giving more color to who these people are. I like that. That's excellent. Anyone else? Okay. So if you ask me, or if I had to summarize it in sort of one silly sentence, again, it's just my silly sentence, but if I take the facts, I'd say it's about a God choosing a people, giving them a set of commandments or rules, and taking them to a specific land, right? That summarizes the story of the Bible. We have a God, he chooses one people, he gives them a set of rules, and they have to keep or abide by these rules in a specific place. Yeah, does that make sense? Yes, no?
Yeah.
No one wants to argue?
I would say maybe.
Maybe. Okay. Okay. So let's assume that this is the case, right? Because ultimately what I'm doing is I'm putting aside Genesis and kind of the story of the forefathers in the beginning. And my assumption is, as Alison said, we have these sort of this people and what they're going through, but ultimately we have the God, we have the people, and we have the place, and we have what they're meant to do. My question is as follows, and again, I'm going with a certain story. We can take this, we could have this same discussion and frame it many different ways. I'm consciously going with one specific way. So my question, if you ask me the $1 million question, is why does God choose the model of a people? Like, have you ever asked yourself, right, God says I'm going to choose one people. Why not just simply in Mount Sinai give the Bible to everyone? Why choose a people?
Jews like to feel special.
Jews like to feel special.
Because it's hard enough getting even just Jews to agree on what they're supposed to do, let alone getting them to agree on a thing that all of the rest of the world would also agree on.
See, these are fascinating points, but again, let's pretend, and again, it doesn't matter for the sake of our discussion if we think God wrote the Bible, man, female, a group of people, it doesn't matter. My question is, we know that this book was written thousands of years ago. We know that. We can even date the earliest manuscript and say it was then, whatever. But my question is, why, if we were talking about this idea of an ethical or sort of shedding light, why not give that light to everyone? Why did whoever wrote this book, or when it started, why the model of one people? Do we have any thoughts about that?
I thought that when the commandments were first given from God, there was this idea that there was thunder and that it was during the day and it was given very loudly. So that even though there was this section of people that it was being given to, it was heard by other people who were able to join that nation. So I don't know if I agree with the premise that there is this model of one person, because I think the idea at that moment in the Bible was that anyone could be included within the peoplehood.
Interesting.
think-
Fascinating point. Yes?
I think that it's the other way. The Jews chose to read this book and they chose to take it with them. So it's not that God chose us, but we chose to acknowledge this and other people might not.
Fascinating. By the way, May, when you say that, are you following the narrative of the Bible or your interpretation? Because I'm talking about if I read the text as it is, no op-eds, as it is. And if I go back, yeah, your very interesting. And if I go back, who said, was it Ruth who said about the thunder?
I did, yeah.
Right. So I love that. I must say the reason I find that fascinating is because it does say, you're right, you're taking what the text says, and it's clearly a moment that could have been seen by everyone. And in fact, we know that, characters like Jethro hear about this. But ultimately, if I look at the actual base text, not trying to add in the op-eds, it's an intimate scene between a Moses, a God, and the people and their misadventures, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to argue me. I want you to say, no, I don't agree with you. No, and I'll tell you why.
Well, I think in the Bible it says that God chose the Jewish people. So that's actually the fact. But there was, even though he chooses, the other side has to agree with that. So by not accepting other gods and not being worshiping animals or nature and whatsoever, we also chose that idea on it. So it's a relationship. So it has two sides.
Interesting. Very interesting point. Very, very interesting point. So it goes back to what you were saying before about this idea that sort of God chose us or we chose God, but it's a kind of, it's a sort of play between both sides, between heavens and earth.
Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone else like have a go before we, in the next stage, of course, we're going to look at what the text actually says about why choosing the model of a people. Again, before we talk about the Jewish people, we're going to start by simply why people. Anyone else want to have a go, or do we move on?
Maybe
Yeah.
expanding on that idea a little bit and just dropping the word covenant in there. I think when the covenant appears in the Bible, it's usually in the context of you do this, I will do this. So just kind of poking that relationship idea a little bit more.
Oh, I've got one.
Yes, Bella?
I'm not sure, but was there like a story that God offered the Torah to all the nations of the world and all of them said no, except the Jewish people?
So Bella, I love that you asked that. There is such a story. However, that story appears in manuscript, meaning that story is written, let's see, at least 2,000 years after the Bible. Okay? So, right, it's called the exegesis, the sort of the midrash. It's one of the interpretive, it's one of our op-eds, if you like, of the Bible. And it's written throughout, starting from around 500 perhaps BC through to the medieval era, where we start having a compilation of texts that sort of give us the in between the lines of the Bible. And one of those in between the line stories is what you said now, this idea of God went shopping and said, who would like this? Everyone said no. And we were the only Nebuch people who said, yeah, sure, we'll take two. But great point. If I go back to, who spoke before Bella? About the sort of, who mentioned the covenant? Alison?
Yeah,
Right.
I think so.
So that also, I think that's a great point, and you know, it reminds one of, you know, perhaps what might be the source of Jewish chutzpah, right? The first time where we have this idea of a covenant, of a two-way, it starts actually, if you look at the text, with Jacob. Jacob is the first of the forefathers, right? Abraham accepts what God says, Isaac accepts what God says, and then Jacob comes along. Right? If we read the text, I haven't brought it here because we're going to deal with other issues, but in a nutshell, God says to Jacob, you know, this is what I want you to do. And then Jacob says, if you, God, do for me A, B, C, D, then I will follow you. Right? The source of Jewish chutzpah. A human saying, this is how it's going to work. But I agree with you. I think covenant is a key word here. So we've got a wide variety, interesting idea of what this model is, you know, kind of what this might look like. Let's look now at one of the texts that I've brought about from the actual, like I said, from the Bible, not a later text, that deals with why it's important for God, according to the narrative of the Bible, to choose a model of one people as opposed to giving the commandments to everyone. Okay. Who wants to read? Anyone?
Happy to read.
Yes, no.
God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am Hashem your God. Do not perform the practice of the land of Egypt in which you dwelled, and do not perform the practice of the land of Canaan to which I bring you, and do not follow their traditions. Carry out my laws and safeguard my decrees to follow them." From Leviticus chapter 18.
Okay. So here we're not yet talking about why a Jewish people. We're talking about sort of God's example for choosing a specific people. What does he have in mind for this people? What's interesting to any of you about this text? What's going on here?
It like shows the significance of Israel.
What do you mean when you say the significance of Israel? Like, what do you mean?
Like the significance to the Jewish people, because God doesn't want them to like practice or like do practice the things outside of Israel.
Okay, right. So what's being created here then?
I think God is just telling people like you shouldn't follow false practices that they've been doing since you were slaves and stuff like that. And it's just God's command that you should follow these specific rules rather than just going on with the blind whatever faith they are doing.
Okay, excellent. Who else would like to add to that?
It creates a tension within the Jewish people to other peoples and other nations, because if they're not allowed to do, if their way is the right way, if the Jewish way is the right way, then to everyone else, like everyone else is doing it wrong. And so in the people's mind, they become a role model. They have the responsibility of showing the world how to live and how to act, whilst being unaccepting of, like, it doesn't have to come out in practice, but they have to an extent, be unaccepting to other forms of practice and other ways of life. And what this does is it just, from a very practical, pragmatic, psychological perspective, it entrenches the position in the people's mind and makes them not want to, it makes them defend it more, because they're saying, look, this isn't for everyone, this is just for the right people, this is just for the people that can bear this responsibility.
Fascinating. So a bit antagonistic, wouldn't you say?
But is there something wrong with that, with being antagonistic?
Interesting. So is this a text which points at a chosen people?
I would say that this particular text that you've got on the screen right now doesn't say they're wrong. It just says don't follow their practices. That's what
Excellent.
I'm reading from this particular text, but I don't know the original Hebrew all that well either.
No, so firstly, okay, so Alison, just one thing I must add, and I completely agree. Those of you who read Hebrew, one of the problems, and we'll see this in one passage, the next passage I think I bring. Obviously, there's a lot of politics and ideology, and a lot that gets lost in translation. I must say that this bit is pretty straightforward. Alison raised a very interesting point. I think as distinct from what Guy, I think it was Guy who had said, right, that there is a differentiation here. There's a creation of a new culture, a new set of rules, right? There's an emphasis on not what you did there, not what they do there, but I'm going to give you something new. So God is bringing into history a new set of rules, a new culture for some reason. And it's interesting that it seems we're not sure if this is a better culture than the others or if it's simply different, right? Because there is a commandment here for us not to perform the others, but is it wrong?
I think in this text, I agree with Alison that it's like these are not the right ways of living for you, but but they might be for the Egyptians and they might be for the Canaanites. And it's like each people to their own.
Interesting. So thus far our plot in the story that we're going with, in the story that says that there is a God who chooses a people and gives them commandments and takes them to a land. He is offering them a set of commandments, which is something, a new culture, which has not yet been seen on earth, correct?
Mm.
According to the narrator of the book, right? Let's move on now to another passage. Let's put this aside. Let's now, so if that was focusing on the set of rules, we're going to focus now a word about nationalism. And when I say nationalism, I mean quote unquote, because the idea of nationalism is a late historic idea. Who would like to read this?
I go.
Yes, okay.
God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come to the land that I give you, the land shall observe a Shabbat rest for God. For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyards, and you may gather this crop. But the 7th year shall be a complete rest for the land. You shall count for yourself 7 cycles of sabbatical years, 7 years, 7 times. You shall sanctify the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land of all its inhabitants. For it is a Jubilee year, it shall be holy to you." Leviticus 25.
Excellent. What is going on here? What is the idea, right? If we're talking about, in the last passage we discussed, God is giving a people he's chosen. We're going to understand in a moment what that chosen means. He's given them a new set of rules, and we're being introduced here to one of these rules. What are we learning here? What's the kishkas, the guts of this?
Is it called
What I
Shemitah?
think,
Yes, Bella?
Is it called Shemitah?
Yes, this is the idea of Shemitah, right? Shemitah and Yovel. So what in essence, what is this? What's the bottom line here?
Rules for like tending to the land.
Right.
Could it be like a way of mimicking how Jews should like obey Shabbat, but on like a lot like a macrocosm of that?
Yeah, fascinating. Definitely. That's makes perfect sense to me, especially when you take the word Shabbat, Sabbath, that appears within the weekly context and within the sort of the yearly context. Would anyone else like to tell me? Let's say, okay, so the Jewish people are an interesting people in that, according to this story, we're one of the first people to have been created outside of a land, right? Like, how do people usually, how are nations, again, quote unquote, how are nations created, right? The Australians or the Brits arrive in Australia hundreds of years ago. They get to a new land, they conquer a land, there's a new set of cultures, they become a people. The Americans the same, a separate group of Brits leave England, they head to America, a new culture, wars, conquering, blah, blah, yada, yada, something is created. The Jewish people, the Jewish story is interesting in that it's a people that are created while they're immigrants, while they're slaves, according to the narrative, in a foreign land. They're being told they're going to come, being brought to a new land. And then this text is fascinating because when I read this text, when I read Shemitah, what I see here is you're being taken to a land that isn't really yours. It's on loan to you from God. And every 7th year, God is going to make sure you remember that the nation state here is a very different kind of model. What are your thoughts on this?
So what I think is, after freeing every Jewish people from the slave of the land from Egypt, so God just set up the rules for all the people uh, who are supposed to follow this rule, and just for the new beginning, like Israel would be the land of the Jewish people who would start the new beginning and stuff, like they have the freedom to do their thing, praise the Lord, as well as do their job and duty and stuff like that.
Like, it's creating a balance, you're saying, great, but between God, who is now part of their lives and a part of this new nation, and them going about their own lives.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Someone else?
Can I ask what happens in the Jubilee year? Is it who becomes free?
So excellent. So the concept of Jubilee is that, okay, so before the Israelites enter into the land of Israel, there's a lottery, and the 12 tribes are divided, and every tribe and every family gets their share, right? So some are in Jerusalem, some are in Tel Aviv, some are in Ra'anana, and so on and so forth. Now, the Jubilee system is a kind of quasi-socialist capitalist system. It allows for 6 years or for 49 years for the rise of capitalism, and then on the 50th year, everything goes back. What does that mean? You're allowed to acquire land anywhere you want in the land beyond your tribe. You can buy slaves, again, in a cultural time where that was kosher. But then the idea is that in the 50th year, or for slaves in the 7th year, everything goes back to whoever it belonged initially. And it's a system that then enables you to work hard, the sort of Protestant, you're going to work hard and get what's yours, but always remember in the back of your mind, it's not really yours. So in the 50th year, everything goes back. Clear?
Thanks.
So
okay.
does that include like freeing animals and stuff as well?
That's a fascinating question. Not if they were purchased. Let me think. If a bull, no, it's on the Jubilee year. It's, to the best of my knowledge, it's in the Jubilee year. It's the idea of lands. The 7th year, it's slaves. There are some discussions in the Talmud in the next text, in the next book we'll discuss, and sort of what happens if you acquire land or buy land and the stuff that are on that land, the cattle, and so in instances like that, it might be different. But by and large, we're talking about land, we're talking about people. That's the sort of separation. Because land is a different category of something you purchase, especially in Aramaic. There are different terms for something which is tangible, something you can move around, and something you can't, and a human is a category in and of itself. So what we have here then, the two passages which I've brought about thus far, and we're going to have to move along now. One is talking, sorry, May, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Jews don't believe in that they are anti-Zionism or they don't believe in Zionism?
No, it's, you know what? I'm going to do a teaser now for the next lecture. Stay tuned for the next lecture where we'll discuss that, because that appears for the first time in the Talmud, in the next book, The Creative Revolution. It's not in this passage here. So we've brought so far two passages where we understand, according to the Bible's narrative, that there is a God. He chooses a people. He gives them a new set of rules to create a new kind of a nation, right? And it's interesting how it's a nation that are created in a foreign land when they are still slaves and immigrants. They are then brought to a new land, and this land, they are told, actually belongs to God. And there's this idea of equality, right? There's an idea of, it's interesting, the commandment which appears the most in the Bible, albeit in different variations, is how the Jewish people need to treat immigrants or foreigners. That is the mitzvah, the commandment that appears the most in the Bible. The idea that, if you like, the ethical code, the importance of equality. Now, before we keep on, any thoughts you have about that, we're going to move on now to perhaps why the kind of the bottom line of why a people, why a Jewish people, not the Jewish people, the final kind of nail in this sort of this argument to do with why one people. Who would like to read?
I can read.
Yes, please, Nicole.
You shall observe all my decrees, and with my ordinances, and perform them. Then the land to which I bring you to dwell will not disgorge you. Do not follow the traditions of the nation that I expel before you, for they did all of these, and I was disgusted with them. So I said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to inherit it, a land of flowering milk and honey. I am Hashem your God, who has differentiated you from the peoples.
Excellent. I'll just note, interestingly, that the question we asked before, right, about whether the rules that the Israelites are meant to keep or not, you know, is it only for us? And already here we get a bit more of a flavor of what God thinks about what other people do, according to the narrative of the Bible. But what would you say is the key? Like, if I ask you, why does God choose one people in all the Bible? And I've studied a few years, not many. There are many that know more than I do. I find this text to be the bottom line of why God chooses a people. What is the role of this people, according to this text? Why does God need one people? Why can't he take everyone?
Because others were praying to the false god. That's why that may be the possibility. Maybe.
Okay, interesting. So that there is a problem with other practices or cultures of other people. Okay. Someone else?
I think coming back also to the question you asked right at the beginning about why are people, why not everyone, in answer to this, that the Jews, that the Israelites, like, agreed to the commandments before they knew what they were, Nasev and Ishma. And also there's like a Talmudic passage that says that like God forced them into agreeing it, that like God lifted up Mount Sinai and threatened to like drop it on their heads unless they agreed to the commandments. I think maybe it was like more like a more practical way of like having a small group of people that you like force into obeying the commandments, and then like letting other people like see their example and choose to follow or not, in a way that's like specific to their own cultures, like rather than like in a way that's like do the exact same mitzvot, because they might not be relevant to like different peoples, rather than like trying to like coerce the whole world into the practices. And also perhaps like the fact that like the mitzvot, the commandments, are like specific to like a specific people in a specific time and a specific place.
Okay, and so Noam, I should disqualify your answer because you were referring to the Talmud, a later book, an op-ed to understand the news item. But you gave a gorgeous answer, so we're going to keep it. Thank you very much for that. Would anyone else like to have a go looking at a different angle of the text? Why God needs one people? Okay, so I'll give it a go. Notice at the bottom I marked, so God says, right, he chose a people. Again, he gives the rules. Here we get a bit more of an understanding that these rules, this new culture has to be given because God has a problem with the other culture. Perhaps it has something to do with idolatry, who knows? But then he says, I am God, the one who separated / differentiated you from the peoples. Meaning, there is a clear text here that says God chooses a people. The Jewish people's purpose is to differentiate themselves or separate themselves. There's a lot of politics in the translation, whether the book chooses separated or differentiated, because separated perhaps has a different connotation to differentiate. But either way, I choose differentiate. This text says God needs to differentiate one people from the rest of the world. If we connect this to the past texts we had, God needs to take a new cultural system to a given land, because I guess you can't create a new land which does not exist yet, but a new culture, give it to a people who are then differentiated from the rest. And this goes back to, I think, what Guy was saying before, perhaps, about this idea of, or perhaps Noam, of creating a sort of differentiation, a separation, which is perhaps antagonistic, and already this idea of a chosen people, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the God says like he separated or differentiated from other people. But the thing is, God created the people, right? So how can he differentiate one person with another?
Fascinating. That's a fascinating moral question. Like, yeah, how can you sort of, if the idea is that God created everyone, then what's the purpose? So in fact, what you're asking, Sam, and I think this is the other $1 million question, is then why differentiate one people, right?
Yes.
So why does God do this?
Yeah, that's my question.
Does anyone else have a thought of why God differentiates the Jewish people? If we look at the narrative of the Jewish people in the Bible?
I think it's because everyone has free will. So even though God made like everyone, if they want their decrees and their commandments to be followed, then it's harder to get everyone to follow it, and it's kind of easier to convince a smaller amount of people. But
Interesting. Okay. So we're short on time, so I'm going to hold the questions. Hold that thought. We're going to our last text. And now already we're getting to, if we've been discussing or playing with the idea, right, grappling with why does God need to choose one people, and perhaps getting a bit of an answer and maybe more questions, which is even better. I hope I answer no questions in the time we have and only ask more questions. Let's move on now to a passage that talks about why God chose the Jewish people. Belly, you wanted to ask something?
Oh, no,
Okay.
no, I didn't. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. Okay. Okay. So this is, final passage regarding why God chose the Jewish people specifically. Up until now, we've been discussing why does God need a people. So we spoke about a new culture, differentiation. Who wants to read why God chose the Jewish people?
I can read it.
Yes, please.
For you are the holy people to Hashem, your God. Hashem, your God, has chosen you to be for him a treasured people above all the peoples that are on the face of this earth. Not because you are more numerous, that all the peoples did Hashem desire and choose you, for you are the fewest of all the peoples. Rather, because of Hashem's love for you, and because he observes the oath that he swore to your forefathers, did he take you out with a strong hand and redeem you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
Why did God choose the Jewish people, according to this passage?
Because they needed saving from slavery.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
he'd already promised to do it to the forefathers. Already promised the forefathers that he would.
So Allison, you said you before spoke about the misadventures of the Jewish people?
I think so, yeah.
Right. So this is interesting. You're saying, because I relate to this, right? I read this passage and what I see, Allison, it's fascinating. It's God here is basically saying, yeah, I love you because I'm God. I love everyone. but I'm stuck with an oath I made to the forefathers, and that's why I'm doing this. Right? Despite 5 books of the Jewish people arguing, misbehaving, God is stuck with an oath. Is that why he chose us? He has no way out?
I'm rereading.
Anyone else?
It can create a parent-child relationship between Jews and God. And I think that on one end, by like God punishes and argues with and rewards and does nice things for the Jews, and the Jews, at the end of the day, they are submissive to God and respect their will and what they say, even if they disagree, as Reform and other Jews are nowadays. At the end of the day, having a people creates an emotional bond between God and the people that you I guess is akin to a parent-child relationship, as I've said, and it makes it easier then to justify having one nation because they're all like a family.
Interesting. Very interesting. Wow, that's a fascinating interpretation. Fascinating. Anyone else like to add? Yes. Nisim? It was you? Or Sam?
Yeah, it's me. So my thoughts are like, okay, God created all the people, but since we are God's children, so there are these 2 brothers fighting with each other. The God sees, like, this guy is overpowering the other guy. So what he does is he swears to his children that I'm gonna take you out of the Egypt. So he takes all the people to the Egypt, and people must be thinking like, okay, like, God helped us in this way. If we go back, we gonna be slave and stuff like that. So we don't have any other options. So we should respect whatever God has commanded us to do, and his uh, like what he has done for us. So that's what all I'm getting from all these
Okay.
things.
Interesting. Alison?
Yeah, somebody mentioned the emotional bond. We hear love, you are a treasured people. Because of Hashem's love for you and because he observes the oath. There's this kind of I don't know if I'm reading too far into it or too separate, but it's almost like swore this oath, I swore this oath in the past because I love you, or I swore this oath and therefore I love you because you maybe, I don't know if there's this element of you made me swear this oath, so I'm kind of proud of you, like you little knuckleheads, you extracted this gift from me, this promise. Almost.
Wow. Very
I don't know
interesting.
if that's too much of a stretch in the text, but he doesn't seem to mind when people argue back sometimes, not all the time.
True. I don't think it's a stretch. I think that's one of the fun things about studying text and studying Bible. It's very difficult to, especially if you look at the commentaries throughout history. I think that's the fun of it. Before we continue, does anyone else that perhaps we haven't heard like to shed light on this passage? Anyone? Okay. So in a nutshell, before we conclude, just a thought that I have on this passage. I want to take you back to the first passage we read. Right, that the first passage, in the beginning God creates, and in the end it says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now this is a very interesting idea because it's God didn't create the world. God spoke and the world was created. There is something already in that very beginning passage about the importance of the words that you utter and that come out of your mouth. And And if we look at why God chose the Jewish people, before getting back to why a people, well, who was the first one to discover God? Abraham, right? Abraham was the first Hebrew in the Bible. The literal meaning of the word Hebrew, Ivri, literally means contrarian. Well, what is Abraham? Abraham is living in a place somewhere between the Turkish-Syrian border, a sort of, 10-hour car drive from where I am, or a few hours, and perhaps longer by camel. And everyone where Abraham is living in a sort of idolatry system with a multiplicity of gods and a multiplicity of economies. And what makes someone a contrarian? What makes someone an Ivri? Abraham discovers God and says, if everyone's on this side, I'm going to the other side. He goes to a new land. He creates a monotheistic system, one God, one economy. And so God chooses him. He chooses him because he discovered him. And I think there's a lot to be said about God's oath, right? The sort of motto being, my word is my bond. The same God that in the Bible speaks and creates, how can such a God speak an oath and then retract despite a people acting time and again unethically? I think that's one of the fascinating challenges about the Bible, is that there's a sort of chosen people question mark element. Are we really the chosen people? Or are we perhaps chosen when we rise to our calling? Right? If we look at the sort of this idea of why God chose a people, right? Perhaps one of the reasons, and a lot of you mentioned this, it's about being more ethical. It's about, what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs calls the dignity of difference. Perhaps one of the main projects of the Bible, one of the revolutions it creates in mankind, because until then it's a little bit foreign, is all men are equal because all men were created in God's image. But then if I go back to Sam, what you asked about this passage, and I think you're spot on, if God created everyone in man's image, why separate a people? Why differentiate a people? How does this help fight problems such as anti-Semitism and racism? Could it be that by separating, you are actually trying to create the message or lead a message that says we are equal despite our differences? Why perhaps God had a problem with the Tower of Babylon? Because it's not about everyone being the same. That would be boring. That's not the point. It's despite the friction, despite the differences, we're all equal. That's just a kind of thought that I have when I look at this text, when I try and combine why a people, why differentiate over time when I'm looking at the text without op-eds. Again, I have been editing. And why the Jewish people? There is an oath, like some of us have mentioned, this sort of father-son or sort of familial relationship. And perhaps it traces back to this idea of the power of words in Judaism. I'd like to conclude before asking if anyone has any thoughts or how this connects to our initial idea about what it means to be Jewish, with one. I'd like to read one passage from a separate book. This book, can everyone see the book?
Yeah.
Yep. So this book was written in Norway. It's a subjective dictionary. Okay. It was written in a Norwegian bookshop, which was sort of fighting ebooks, and they promised this book would never become an ebook. They created a subjective dictionary, allowing people to write what they thought about different things. And one of the entries is what it means to be Jewish. Okay. So here it goes. And I'm giving you part of the text here so you can see. Jew. What do I win? Oh boy, says the voice, just you wait, just you wait. A prize like this comes along only once in once. And you, buddy boy, you are the big winner. So get used to this voice, because we're going to be working together for a long time. And I mean a long time. Is it a job? No, absolutely not. Although there is quite a bit of work involved and a lot of responsibility. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was some large-scale suffering down the line. And the payoff will always be semi-opaque. Just give it some time to get into the rhythm, 8, 9 generations. Before long, it'll be your thing, like freckles or lactose intolerance. Yes, but why me? Ha, says the voice. What a Jewish question. Why you? Because you're chosen. Yes, but how was I chosen? How was anyone chosen? I put a bunch of names inside a rotating Lucide cylinder, and you're familiar with Lucide. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I cranked the sucker a few times, reached, pulled out a slip, and presto, here we are. Sounds kind of random. Maybe, chuckles the voice. Or was it providence? Ha! See what I did there? One man's fate is another man's rotating lucide cylinder. That's called metaphysics. He nods, not really understanding, but also not wanting to look dumb. They chat for a while longer, small talk, really, until he gathers the courage to ask his final question. So what's in it for me? Any thoughts, final thoughts on what we initially thought on what it means to be Jewish and what we've learned that the Bible has to say?
There was an element of my responsibility piece in there. And I guess looking back on what we've sort of dived into here, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to consider. I don't know how to relate to it, to be honest.
Okay, okay. Anyone else?
I don't know.
Okay. Have we enjoyed ourselves in the time we've spent talking together?
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Have we? No, thank you. We've been doing this together. Have we learned something new?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Are we going to see each other again for the next class about Talmud?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Any questions?
Can I ask the second text that we read?
Yep.
What was it? Was it Leviticus 18?
It was 18:1 to 5.
The one before that?
Oh, then Leviticus 25.
Yeah. Leviticus 18:1 to 5. Okay, brilliant. Thanks.
Johnny, can you just clarify the differentiation piece one more time? Why does God need a differentiated peoples in the land?
Okay, so excellent. Who asked that? Alex?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's a difference between, like, what interests me when I read the text is, and especially when I started reading it, like, I went through a process of understanding at some point in my life, like I said at the beginning, that I'm only understanding the text through the op-eds and what I've been told, and reading the text with commentaries. And in fact, as we've seen in this class, it's very hard to come about with answers without referencing ourselves to a certain commentary and a certain point in Jewish history. When I then started looking back at the text, the first question that comes about is why choose a people and why choose a Jewish people? And this text referring to the differentiation doesn't speak about why choose the Jewish people, right? That goes back to the oath and Abraham, or perhaps that's an option. But I think what's going on here with the Bible and the idea of differentiating, I think it's this idea that we don't all get along. Like I think some of you had raised this idea of, it's interesting when I look back at the sort of answers you'd given at the start of what it means to be Jewish. I think they're all spot on. They're fascinating. And notice, by the way, we haven't gotten even, I purposely didn't want to get into the legalities of the halacha of what it means to be Jewish judicially, because for me, regardless of my personal views, the most powerful passages are regardless to do this or do that. It's passages like this, where God all of a sudden says, I'm God, and the reason I chose you is to differentiate you. God has dropped a bomb, and by dropping a bomb, I mean, what I hope more than anything happens in this class is not that we understand why God differentiated. I think that's a very hard task to do. What I'm hoping happened in this first class, in this first discussion, is a sort of perhaps agreement, perhaps, or disagreement, that the reason God chose a people is to differentiate them. God, according to the biblical narrative, has to differentiate the people, has to give them a new set of rules that have never been in the world before. He has to bring them to a place, albeit that exists, but to give them completely different conditions. And then as you ask, the question is why? So why do we need to separate? Why not give everyone? And what comes to mind to me, if we look at this last passage again, one of the interesting things is notice that there is a prophecy here. This passage, this biblical passage that was written thousands of years ago, again, it doesn't matter who we thought wrote it, or whether it's divine or not, it speaks about this passage saying God chose us because we are the fewest of all people. I always find this fascinating because this passage says the Jewish people are going to remain a few, small number, and that has been the case consistently throughout Jewish history. And it's interesting if I go back to this idea of differentiating, because it makes you wonder constantly, why does God have to choose a people to put them aside? Now, thoughts that I have and what I'm trying to raise with you, and what interests me more is not the answers, it's the questions and the speculations. What I can speculate if I'm asked is I think this idea of the dignity of difference. You need to choose a people, not because they're the best, surely not according to the biblical narrative, by far not the best people. You know what? I'll even challenge you. Read the texts going back into Genesis about Jacob and Esau. You're all familiar with, right, Jacob and Esau. According to the actual text, if I ask you, who's misbehaving more, Esau or Jacob? It's actually Jacob. It might not be nice to say, I hope thunder doesn't strike me now, but Jacob is actually misbehaving more than Esau. Esau, according to the actual literal view, is a straight shooter. Yes, according to the narrative, God chooses Jacob and not Esau, so later commentators turn Esau into the scapegoat, into Rome, into the Greek Empire, into everyone who ever tried to chase us with a pogrom. But so if we look at it that way, in my view, the Jewish people are not chosen because they're the best people, but it's because there is a task, a burden of differentiation. God, for some reason, needs to differentiate one people, give them a separate set of rules. All I've got, all I can come to if I'm asked, is that somehow it's to connect to this message of all humanity are equal despite being different. And I must say, I'm not fully happy with that answer. And that's part of the purpose of discussing these texts is shedding light on what are the key questions and what together we think perhaps are other answers. Is that sort of answer clear?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
One thought and then one question. One thought that you were mentioning Jacob and Esau, and I've heard it said before that the Bible just has this God has this preference for younger sons, second sons, and that element of the Jewish people being the smaller or the lesser, or kind of in that sense the later of the two, is sort of an echoing, reflective piece of that. It seems like to me, coming later, being a little smaller, this has that same kind of parallel, it seems like to me. But the question was, would you mind giving us the I guess the dates of composition of the 4 books that you're talking about? I can Google it later, but if you don't mind.
Sure. So just one point, you mentioned a very interesting point about, right, this idea of choosing the sort of the second or the youngest son or child. I just, again, it's not this class, it's a separate class, but interestingly, I thought like you until you reach the question of who is going to be the tribe that is going to lead the Jewish people. And the tribe you'd expect to be the leader would be the tribe, right? Joseph, the youngest son, and the Bible chooses Judah against all odds. Judah sinned, Joseph is perfect. Joseph has God with him all the time, perhaps because he's younger, and yet for some reason, the Bible changes the script, the way it goes, and goes with Judah. For reasons we're not going to discuss now, but it's just sort of, food for thought. In terms of text, no worries. In terms of texts and when they're written, this is a good question. So if we go back, King David is 3,000 years ago. King David, according to tradition, is writing Psalms, or some of the Psalms. Psalms are referencing the Bible, clearly a Bible. This takes us back, you're talking you'd have to Google it, but I think like 3,500 years, or between 3 to 3.5. We're talking about the earlier books. With the last book, with Deuteronomy, there is a debate. when it kind of appears, and what its kind of position is. If we look at if we look at the manuscripts we have, so the earliest manuscripts we have date back to 2,000 years ago. In fact, what we have, the earliest manuscripts we have, and again, when I say earliest manuscript, it means physical books. That doesn't mean that we didn't have earlier, right? Like 2,000 years ago, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not have a complete Bible. The earliest complete Bible we have is a fascinating story that relates to espionage and the Mossad and who knows what. And that goes back to like 900 AC, sort of the year 900. But again, that's late. We're talking earliest manuscripts you have of sort of the later books is 2,000 years ago. But the belief is, I guess, you're talking around 3,000 years. Take plus minus. We can look academically at sort of, you know, where the manuscripts or where the assumptions lie, but that's what we're talking about by and large.
Okay, thank you.
And then just to conclude with a bit of a context, then, if that's sort of thousands of years ago, we're talking about Bible, then the next book that we're going to discuss that creates the next revolution is then sort of compiled, discussed, but ultimately written 1,500 years ago, or sealed, like the final editing of the Talmud is 1,500 years ago, 1,400 years ago, and then so on and so forth. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so you say like we were chosen because of what exactly?
So again, it's not what I'm saying. It's I'm bringing text and giving one side of it. But if we look at this text, the text in Deuteronomy, right, the last book, and again, this is one of many passages, but this is a reoccurring theme. God saying, and every time he says he wants to get rid of us because he's upset because we misbehave, there's this reoccurring theme of God is going to stick with us because he swore to the forefathers, because of a promise, because of an oath. So God sticks with the Jewish people, according to this reading. Challenge me afterwards. I hope in the next class you'll say, Johnny, I disagree with you. But he chooses us because of an oath to the forefathers. We then asked, why does he choose the forefathers? This goes back to Abraham and sort of, you know, the Abraham model of a person discovering a monotheistic God.
Okay.
I'll just conclude with a final note saying many people say that one of the points of uniqueness to the Bible is that, you know, we created a monotheistic God. I don't think historically that's true. Historically, I don't think the Bible created monotheism. I think it was there beforehand in specific places in Egypt and perhaps other places. I think what's unique about the Bible is what all of you touched upon when we spoke about what it means to be Jewish, and that is an ethical code. That when the Bible comes along, it's perhaps the first time where there's this idea of private individual liberty. The idea that because you are created in the image of God, all men are equal. Having said that, any final notes before we say goodbye and see you next time?
But if you say that all men are equal, then
how can you choose one person, one people?
Exactly. Or are we talking
about? Excellent question, the $1 million question. If you ask me, and I want us to keep thinking about this, it's because everyone's equal. Having chosen the Jewish people doesn't mean we're not equal to others. Again, this is perhaps a provocative idea, but perhaps it means everyone being equal, God wants to take humanity to a certain place, to work on ourselves, and in order to do that, mankind need to learn a lesson. And perhaps the way God wants to teach mankind a lesson is by this practice of differentiation, and what one of you mentioned before, this practice of tension between one people and the rest of the nations.
So it's like all men and women are equal, or all men are equal?
All men are equal. According to what we've read, again, I haven't brought those passages, but according to the Bible, the way I see it, all men are equal, especially given that the commandment that appears the most amount of times is the importance of how Jews treat non-Jews or others that, you know, sort of want to be in our land, albeit with different, you know, caveats. All men are equal, but that doesn't change the fact that God chooses a people, perhaps, not because they're better, because in the initial beginning there was a reason why they were chosen because of an Abraham, but in time it became part of a practice of, through this differentiation, teaching that we're all different but we're all equal. I'm going to leave us with these sort of thoughts because we're way beyond the time, and we'll keep on next time. But like I said, it's good that there are questions because I don't want there to be answers. If now that we've finished, you all agree with me and have a smile on your face, I have failed. I want you to have a smile on your face and disagree with me even more next time. Okay?
All right.
Cool.
Excellent. So I'll see you next time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
I just want to add one
Thank
final
you.
thing. The thing that has been most difficult for me, and it's so annoying, I hope I figure this out next time, is that I can't see your faces. I hope next time to be able to see your faces.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thank
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 you
you
all.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Next
you.
time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.